Hello my friends and welcome back to another video. Today is my February wrap up. So I'm going to talk about the books that I read for the second half of February. If you want to see what I read from the first half of February, I will link the recent reads video that I did earlier and it'll be in the description box. So the second half of February was a struggle for me. I had a lot of books on my TBR that I wanted to get to. I had a lot of plans for reading, and I'll be honest, I wasn't in a reading mood. I didn't really want to read. Every time I thought about reading, I was just like, So, I was in a pretty bad slump, and I'm kind of still in that slump right now. I'm trying to get out of it, but I was in a slump for the second half of February, so I don't have too much to talk about. I actually have 3 books and the rest are manga because that is primarily what I ended up reading for the second half of the month was manga, because I just could not sit down and read a book, and manga was the only thing that was fast enough and easy enough to keep my attention. So I will talk about the books first and then I'll talk about the manga in case anyone doesn't really want to listen to me talk about manga. So first up we will talk about the books. I only have 3, so I will start with the bottom rated ones and work our way up to the top. First up is the 3.5 star category, and the first one I have is Found, an anthology of found footage horror stories. I read this in my found footage reading vlog. I read this alongside episode 13 and I have mixed feelings about this collection. I think it's a really great idea. I think that it's really cool to have so many short stories with a focus of found footage. I think found footage horror books are very hard to come by, and so when I found this I was really excited about it. I heard a lot of good things. But it's hard for me because the stories that I really liked in here were great and they were amazing. But the stories that I really didn't like in here, I really just didn't like or get along with. So overall, I would say that I liked and disliked about an equal amount of stories, and I just didn't know how to rate this book because I wanted to give it 4 stars. Again, the stories that I rated really low, because I did rate every story individually. I gave them each a star rating and then kind of averaged it out. I'm pretty sure when it averaged out it was a 3.36, so I decided to just go to a 3.5 for this one. So my favorite stories in this collection were 2 Months Too Long, Junk Pickup, The Veiled Lady, Summons, This Video is Unavailable, Dear Penny, and A Small Hand-Built House. A Small Hand-Built House is actually the only story that I gave 5 stars, and it was my absolute favorite in the collection. This collection is actually really interesting because the first story is really engaging, and it kind of just is really sucks you in, and it's a very odd, bizarre story, and it just makes you read and keep reading these. And then the very last story, which is the best in my opinion, really ends this collection on a high note as well. So it starts and ends on a high note, and I really liked that. I think the problem is the stories that I ended up not liking as much, they had a focus on certain things that I just don't care for in horror or in found footage. They're just not my ideal kind of stories, and so it made it harder for me to enjoy those ones, and it kind of brought down the collection in my opinion, because again, I would read one that I really liked, and then I would have 3 in a row that I was just okay, these are fine, these are alright, and even some were just 2 stars. So I just feel like I can't give it a 4 star because of how many I just really didn't like, but I do think this is a really good short story collection. I think it's very interesting, and I like that they did this. I like that it was found footage themed. I think that's really awesome, and I do think a lot of people are going to like it. I have a feeling that the stories that I didn't like, a lot of people will like, so I definitely recommend checking it out still. It's just not my perfect short story collection. This next book is also a 3.5 star rating, and I have a feeling this is going to be a very unpopular opinion because I have seen so many people love this book, but I just didn't really love it, and that is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. So this book is about Louise, and her parents have just died. She ends up going back home to deal with the funeral and her parents' house and all that kind of stuff, and her and her brother Mark have a very tumultuous relationship. They do not really get along, and so she's really dreading seeing him and like interacting with him. And of course, you know, things get wild, things get crazy, blah blah blah. I don't want to give too much away because this is a very interesting story, and I feel like if you tell too much about it, you're gonna be spoiling it. So I can tell you that this is not really a haunted house story. I already knew that going into it though. I had been, you know, reading reviews, and I knew a bunch of people saying this is not a haunted house story, so don't go in expecting one. So I already knew that off the bat, and I wasn't expecting a haunted house story. I think my problem is that the very beginning of this book is a lot of Louise and Mark. It's their relationship as siblings and them fighting and arguing, and Mark is really annoying. He is so immature. He's a big man child, and I couldn't stand him. Like, he was honestly getting on my nerves. I just hated reading about him. Every time he did something, I just was like rolling my eyes. I just didn't like Mark, and he was infuriating. Then you get to the middle of the book where you start learning what's really going on, and I know Grady Hendrix is known for his comedic horror, but to me, it was just too silly. It was a little too like funny, haha, and like I expected a little bit more in like the horror department. I just was expecting not necessarily to be scared, because I don't really expect to be scared anymore by books. I just know that's kind of a hard, you know, thing to ask for. So I kind of knew that I wasn't going to be like, you know, terrified, but it just came off very silly and like weird for me. And you know, the puppet thing I think could have been done really well. I was really hopeful, but to me, I think it was just silly and kind of goofy, and it didn't really work for me. However, the very end of the book, once everything came together and like the ending, I did like how everything tied up in the end, and I did like the ending. So this book was really hard for me because I was interested in it. Then it got weird, a little too weird for me that I didn't care for, and then the ending I did like, and I did enjoy how everything wrapped up. I just really wanted this to be a scary, you know, like doll puppet thing happening here, and I really didn't get that. It wasn't what I wanted, and I love Grady Hendrix. I love him a lot, but to me this is not on the same level as My Best Friend's Exorcism or the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Those two, I just can't see this coming close to it, in my opinion. I didn't have the same feelings about this book that I did with those two. I even think Horror Store just had a less silly approach, and that one to me was pretty silly as well. I think this one is on the same level with the Final Girl support group for me, because I gave that one 3.5 as well. I wanted to love this one a lot, and I know a lot of people do love it, but I just thought that it got a little too silly for me, and honestly it wasn't really what I wanted. I really think it could have been really, really good. It just didn't do what I wanted it to do, and I was pretty disappointed, honestly, when the plot went in the direction it did. So I don't know, there was just a lot to it that I didn't care for, unfortunately, but I do know a lot of people love this one, so I know that I am in the minority. I do enjoy Grady Hendrix writing, and I thought it was, you know, a fun time. It just wasn't really what I wanted it to be. Next up is the only 4-star that I have, and it is the last book that I have to talk about, and that is The Between by Tananarive Due. So this was actually my Patreon's book club pick for February, and I'll be honest, I did not know what to expect with this one. I have read The Good House by Tananarive Due, and I really, really, really loved that book. So I was a little, you know, nervous because I have such high expectations from The Good House. This book is about Hilton, and when he was younger, his grandmother actually saved his life and died while saving him. Now, in the present day, his wife, Day is actually a judge. She just got elected. She's actually receiving these nasty, hateful, racist notes. And then there's like a third layer to this story where Hilton is having these really weird dreams, but they're affecting like his reality as well. And like sometimes he'll see things and he thinks it's real, but then they won't be real, or you know, it's a very weird situation. And so for me, it felt like this book had kind of three plots going on, right? Hilton and his grandma, Day and the notes, and then Hilton's dreams. And so for the longest time, it was hard for me to kind of mesh the three together and figure out how everything was connected and figure out how it was part of one story. And I will say this book does kind of leave you confused a lot of the time. I know that it took a really long time, I would say about 60 to 70%, until I really figured out where the story was going, which I don't necessarily mind, but it did make it a little bit harder for me to get sucked into the story because I was confused. I think Tananarive writing is really lovely and it's very simple and easy to read, and I never have a problem like comprehending her writing. I think the problem is that I was just confused by the plot. Hilton was also an interesting main character. He was very realistic a lot of the times, but also I couldn't stand him sometimes because the choices he made really infuriated me, and I just didn't really understand what he was doing a lot of the time. And he was just a really interesting character. I couldn't tell if I liked him or if I hated him. Whereas in The Good House, Angela, I loved like right off the bat. So it was kind of just a different experience for me. And then the ending. This ending was so devastating in my opinion. I was heartbroken. I did not like the ending when I finished the book, and it took me a while to sit with it to realize that I did kind of understand why the book ended the way it did, and I see the point and really why it had to end the way it did. But man, I really didn't like it at first. I was really upset, but I have come to terms with it a bit more, and I do realize like the necessity of this kind of ending and like what the real point of this kind of ending was. Now I feel a little bit differently than I did before. However, I will say that in the live discussion we had for the book club talking about this book, we all decided on an ending that we would have preferred for this book to have, and I still think that ending would have been better than the ending we got, just because this one was so unsatisfying and the one that we talked about would have been a little bit more satisfying. But I still understand the reasoning for this ending, and I'm really glad I read this book. I love Tananarive, and I just can't wait to read more from her. Time for manga. So the first 4 volumes that I'm going to talk about are from a Patreon exclusive reading vlog that I did. I did like a manga taste test where I read the first volume from 4 different series, and I kind of just basically said like what I thought of the series just from that first volume, how I felt about going forward, if I was really excited about some of them. So these first 4 are from that video, and I'm not technically rating them yet because I personally like to rate manga by the series and not by the individual volume, just because that makes more sense for me. So I'll give you my tentative rating, and I will tell you what they are from my least favorite to my most favorites. Let me tell you about these 4 first. So first up is Can't Stop Cursing You. Obviously this is the first volume. I think this is ongoing, but I'm also not sure. I have all the volumes that are available, but I've only read this one. So this first volume was about curse killing. Basically, someone can make a deal with a curse god. They have 30 days to curse kill 30 people or else something bad's going to happen. But basically, they curse kill these people, and the main character is this guy, and he is a curse breaker, and the person that they are after in this volume is a high school student, and he's posing as a high school teacher to try to figure out who is doing this curse killing. This tentative rating is a 3.5 because this is very similar to Death Note in my opinion. Even the characters share a lot of similarities. This guy reminds me a lot of L. The person that is doing the curse killing reminds me a lot of Light. There's just like a lot of similarities even between the curse killing, like just like certain rules there are, and the curse god reminds me a little bit of a Shinigami. It just like there's a lot of similarities between this story that I read in the first volume and Death Note. I am a very big fan of Death Note, so unfortunately it was very hard for me to read this and appreciate it as its own individual story. My biggest issue was I just think that because Death Note has been out for, you know, much longer and I've already read the whole series, I was just able to realize how much more I enjoyed Death Note and the characters and how, you know, more depth they had and how more thought out the plot was. Now this is only just the first volume of this manga series, so I'm trying not to judge it just on this. I don't know what's going to happen in the second volume, and based off the ending of this first volume, I do feel like we might be going in a slightly different direction, but it's very much a cat and mouse game. It's very much of them trying to one-up each other and trying to figure out, you know, who's who first and who's doing what first and get the upper hand. It's very much like that, which is very similar to Death Note. So unfortunately, I just had a hard time seeing this as its own individual story because I kept comparing it to Death Note even though I didn't really want to. I'm gonna continue the story, but it was probably my least favorite out of the 4 that I read. Next up is Monster, and this is a much loved series, and now I have the deluxe editions, so I actually only read half of this for the video and then I finished this volume like later on. But I'm also giving this a 3.5, like tentatively, and I know that sounds like outrageous because everyone loves this story. This is about the main character, Dr. Tenma. He is in Germany working as a surgeon, but he is originally from Japan, and his hospital is run by politics. And one day, this little boy comes in and he needs surgery immediately or he is going to die. However, when he is about to start the surgery, the mayor actually needs medical attention, and his superiors tell him to prioritize the mayor because he is more important than the child. However, Dr. Tenma decides not to listen and he saves the child's life, and in turn, because of the other doctors having to take care of the mayor ends up passing away. Other things start happening and it's like a crazy thing. My biggest issue is I already knew what was going to happen. I do know this story fairly well, only like the very beginning, because I did attempt to watch the anime a long time ago, but I did attempt to watch it, so I already knew all this and it just wasn't that exciting to me. The surgeon talk wasn't that exciting. The hospital politics didn't really get me. It just wasn't very interesting, but I will say the second half of this volume I did like more, and I think I'll like the second volume much more after this. I think it's just gonna keep getting better and better for me, but this first volume just really didn't do much for me, and I wasn't that excited by it, mostly because I already knew what was coming. It wasn't that surprising to me. I just didn't like fall head over heels in love with this first volume, but I am excited to continue the series, and I do think it should be getting more interesting as I progress through the series. Next up is The Girl from the Other Side, Volume 1. I gave this a tentative rating of 4. I wasn't super excited by the first half of this volume, but I really enjoyed where the second half of this volume went, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this series. I really love the artwork. It has a very fairy tale, like just simple look to it, and it really matches the story. Basically, the story is about 2 kingdoms, the inside and the outside. The outside is where the cursed live, and the inside is where the humans live. And basically the humans and the cursed are not supposed to interact. However, the story is following this little girl and this guy here, and they are interacting, which should not happen. We don't get a lot of answers from this volume, but at the very end we start getting a little bit here and there, and then at the end we get left on a cliffhanger, and there's some very interesting things happening at the end of this manga, and I'm very excited to continue. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. It just sounds like it's easy. It's like spooky cute. It has a fairy tale vibe, like I said, and I'm very interested in it. I'm very intrigued, and I did really enjoy trying this manga out. The last manga volume from that video, and my favorite of the video, was Island in a Puddle, and this is by the same mangaka who wrote Erased. If you don't know, Erased is one of my favorite mangas and animes of all time. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, so I kind of knew I was going to be in love with this story, but I was not sure what the story was about. I had no idea. I didn't read the plot. I just picked it up because I knew that it was the same mangaka, so I was pleasantly surprised. This story is about a brother and sister, and their mother isn't really around. She leaves them alone to their own devices, and she basically makes these infrequent trips home to like give them money so that they can survive, and then she leaves again. And so the story starts off with the brother and sister, and their mother comes home for one of these trips, and she decides to take them to this amusement park, and they have lots of fun. You know, they're eating good food, they're riding rides, they're having a blast. And then their mother sends them onto the Ferris wheel, and before she puts them on the Ferris wheel, she hands the little boy some money, and he knows that she is going to leave again. And so they get on the Ferris wheel, and when they get up to the top, they watch her leave. And while they're on this Ferris wheel, something wild happens and crazy, and I was not expecting it. This was so intense, and I should have known, because this mangaka really just kind of like eases you into something that seems so like nice and light and lovely, and you know, there's a little bit of darkness there, and then all of a sudden just boom, it's intense and it's crazy and it's wild, and you're like on the edge of your seat and you're worried and you're just like, your heart's racing, and I was just flabbergasted. I should have known going into it, but I didn't. I didn't know what to expect, and this was wild. I literally already bought the rest of the manga. There's only 5 volumes, and the series is actually complete, and I just bought the other 4. I just got them in the mail, so I will be finishing this series because this also ended on a cliffhanger, and I have to know what's going on because these kids, you know, they're in some trouble. And again, that's a very reoccurring theme because in Erased, all the kids were always in trouble, and it was always very scary. So loved this. This is a tentative 5-star. I have a feeling that this whole series is going to be a 5-star, which wouldn't surprise me. Okay, and the last thing that I have to talk about is the entire series of Sweat and Soap. I read the whole series of Sweat and Soap. I read volumes 1 through 11. I'm just going to hold up volume 1 because that is a very heavy stack. But this series, I know everyone talks about this series, and I should have known that I was going to be head over heels in love with it. The whole series is a 5-star, okay? It's a 5-star. I can't, it's a 5-star. I loved this series so much. I'm not really going to tell you much about the plot because it's kind of weird, but it's also the cutest thing ever. It's an office romance, but the 2 characters are just so wholesome and sweet, and they just have such like a great communication and a great relationship. If you're looking for a manga series that has like really healthy relationships like in it, I really recommend looking into this one because the relationship is so beautiful between these 2 characters, and just watching their relationship progress throughout the series is just so wonderful. They're also a really good age because she's 26 and he's 29, and I really liked that because I feel like a lot of romance manga that I tend to read is always like, you know, like high school students, and sometimes I want to read, you know, about adults and more adult things, and this also has some smut in it, which, I'll be honest, the first volume, I was not expecting it. I had no idea what I was getting into with this series. I didn't really know the plot. I just knew everyone was talking about it. And so when I first started reading, I was like, huh, this is weird, okay. And then the smut happened and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I was not expecting that at all. I really, really liked it. It was just such a sweet, sweet series, and I loved these two so freaking much. The ending made me cry like a little baby, and the ending's not even anything crazy. Like, nothing that wild happens. It's a very, like, normal ending, but I just, like, couldn't handle it because I loved these characters so much, and I got so attached so quick, and I just was so happy for them that I just couldn't help but, like, cry, and I'm a crybaby. Obviously, we know that, so I cried, but I just absolutely loved it. There is a little bit of a weird thing about this story, which I don't really know if I want to mention. It's not bad, it's just very shocking. Like, when I read the first volume, I was like, what the heck is this story? But after the first volume, you kind of just get used to it. It's not that weird. Like, it's really not. Like, it just felt weird, I think, because I wasn't expecting it. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, I love this. And I was just hooked. It had me giggling, it had me laughing, it had me crying, it had me emotionally invested from the very beginning. I loved it. New romance favorite for sure. I highly, 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 highly recommend. It was amazing. All right, my friends, that is going to do it for my February wrap up. I told you it was going to be short, sweet, and to the point. I told you I didn't have that much to talk about. I was in a slump. I read a lot of manga. I didn't read too many books. I mean, I knew this was going to happen, so I'm sorry that this is really kind of fast and shorter than usual, but I just really didn't have that much to talk about, and you know, sometimes I'm slumpy, sometimes I just don't read a lot of books, what can I say? So I hope you enjoyed. If you've read any of these books and you want to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, we can discuss. Tell me what your favorite and least favorite book you read from February was, and we can talk about that. If you enjoyed this wrap-up and you enjoy my wrap-ups in general, please give this video a thumbs up. That way I know that you like them and I can keep doing them for you in the future. If you haven't already subscribed, feel free to do so. We can become friends, talk about books, horrifying books, thrilling books, romance books, manga, all that good fun stuff. And with that being said, I hope you are having a great day, night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!